She was called a gold digger by billionaire CEO who dumped her. 5 years later, he discovers what she's been hiding. The left eyebrow, just like his, and all the air leaves Martin's chest. He stands frozen in the doorway of Little Harbour Arts, watching a 4-year-old boy paint with such fierce concentration that his tongue pokes out slightly. The child's dark hair catches the afternoon light streaming through the gallery windows, and when he glances up at his teacher for approval, that distinctive arch above his left eye makes Martin's knees nearly buckle. It's the same genetic quirk that 3 generations of his family have carried: his grandfather, his father, himself. And now this boy whose mother once loved him enough to keep this secret for 5 long years. Ever been judged by someone who claimed to love you? Or accused of being something you're not? Martin knows that weight. He's carried it since the night he discovered those bank statements in Aria's apartment. Multiple deposits from his family. His corporation, each one carefully documented, each one seemingly proving what his mother had warned him about. She's after your money, Martin. They always are. The evidence had seemed so clear, so damning. The woman he'd planned to propose to had been receiving payments behind his back, so he'd done what any betrayed man would do. He'd confronted her with the proof, called her exactly what those papers suggested. She was, and walked away while she stood there crying, refusing to explain herself. He called her a gold digger, and walked away. 5 years later, he discovers what she's been hiding. The truth hits harder than any boardroom defeat he's ever faced. This boy, Leo, according to the name tag on his little easel, has his eyes, his stubborn chin, and that telltale eyebrow that marks him as undeniably Martin's son. But more than genetics connects them. The child paints with an intensity Martin recognizes from his own childhood, when art had been his escape before business became his prison. Leo's small fingers grip the brush with determination, creating bold strokes of blue and gold across his canvas, building something beautiful from nothing. Just like his mother had once tried to build a life with Martin before pride and suspicion tore everything apart. Through the gallery window, Martin watches Aria move between her students, guiding their hands, encouraging their creativity. She hasn't seen him yet, and he's grateful for these stolen moments to study how she's changed. Her hair is shorter now, more practical for a teacher perhaps, but her grace remains unchanged. She kneels beside Leo, whispering something that makes him giggle, and the sound carries through the glass like an accusation. This is what Martin missed. First words, first steps, first days of school. All because he'd been too proud to listen, too hurt to investigate deeper, too convinced of his own righteousness to question whether those bank statements told the complete story. The revelation had come through an unlikely source. His assistant, cleaning out old files, had discovered a folder marked Foundation Scholarship Recipients. Inside, years of documents showed monthly payments to promising artists, Aria among them. She'd won the scholarship 2 years before they'd even met, granted for her exceptional talent and commitment to bringing art education to underprivileged communities. The payments he'd condemned her for had been legitimate, earned through merit long before she'd known his name. But by then, she'd vanished from New York, leaving no forwarding address, no way to apologize, no chance to take back the words that had destroyed everything. Stay with me to see the choice that could heal them or end them for good. Now, standing outside her gallery in this small coastal town she's built. Into her sanctuary, Martin faces the hardest decision of his life. Does he walk through that door and claim his place in their lives? Does he have any right to disrupt the peace she's created without him? Leo's laughter rings out again as he shows his painting to another student, and Martin sees himself in that proud little stance, that need for approval, that joy in creation. This child deserves to know his father, but does his father deserve to know him after what he's done? The door chime sounds as another parent enters, and Aria looks up reflexively. Their eyes meet across the space, and time stops. Her face cycles through shock, anger, and something else. Maybe grief for what they'd lost, or fear for what his presence means. She touches Leo's shoulder protectively, and Martin understands the message. Whatever happens next, her son comes first. Their son, though she doesn't know he knows yet. The weight of 5 years presses down on him. 5 years of her raising their child alone. 5 years of Leo growing up without a father. 5 years of Martin believing a lie that his pride wouldn't let him question. The successful CEO who commands boardrooms and closes million-dollar deals stands, paralyzed by a 4-year-old's painting and a woman's protective gaze. Welcome back to Mr. Steele Rich Stories, where we explore the choices that define us and the second chances that transform us. For those just joining our community, we believe every mistake carries a lesson and every ending might be a new beginning. If stories about second chances and real-life lessons move you, tap subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a chapter on Mr. Steele Rich Stories. Drop trust in the comments if you think second chances are earned, not given. The November rain came down in sheets that Thursday afternoon, turning the outdoor artist market into a scramble of vendors protecting their work. Martin had only stopped by because his usual coffee shop was closed for renovations, and the market's mobile espresso cart made a decent substitute. He stood under the cart's awning, watching chaos unfold. Painters covering canvases with plastic tarps. Sculptors racing to move pieces under shelter. Jewelry makers frantically boxing their displays. That's when he heard it. A tiny, desperate whimper coming from beneath an abandoned display table. Martin wasn't a dog person. He wasn't really an animal person at all. But something about that sound pulled him out into the downpour. Under the table, shivering and soaked, a puppy no bigger than his shoe trembled against the cold metal leg. Matted golden fur stuck to its tiny frame, and frightened eyes looked up at him with the kind of hope that made his chest ache. He reached for the animal awkwardly, unsure how to hold something so fragile. His expensive suit was already ruined from the rain anyway. Careful. Support his back legs. The voice came with a presence beside him. A woman knelt in the mud without hesitation, her own clothes already drenched, guiding. Martin's hands with a gentle efficiency that suggested she'd done this before. Together, they lifted the puppy free from its hiding spot. "There's a vet clinic 2 blocks north," she said, already moving. "Can you run?" Martin could run. He'd run marathons for charity, completed triathlons for bragging rights. But he'd never run through city streets in a $3,000 suit, cradling a shaking puppy against his chest while a stranger with paint-stained fingers kept pace beside him, whispering reassurance to an animal that couldn't understand her words but seemed calmer just hearing her voice. Her name was Aria. He learned that in the vet's waiting room, both of them were dripping on the linoleum floor. They didn't exchange numbers that day. Aria simply said, "I'm at the market every Thursday if you want to check on him," and left with a smile that stayed in Martin's mind all week. He went back the next Thursday, and the next. The puppy, whom the vet had treated and Aria had fostered, became their excuse, but soon they didn't need excuses. 3 weeks later, Martin found himself in Aria's apartment for the first time, a 3rd floor. Walk-up that smelled perpetually of cinnamon from her tea and turpentine from her paintings. Nothing matched. Her plates came from thrift stores, each one a different pattern, each one carrying a story. She'd tell while serving dinner she'd cooked on a stove with only 3 working burners. "This one's from Portland," she'd say, setting down a blue floral plate. "This one's from an estate sale in Brooklyn." The woman's daughter said her mother painted on Sunday mornings and collected dishes on Saturday afternoons. Martin, who owned matching everything purchased by an interior designer he'd never met, found himself enchanted by the chaos. Her vinyl collection played on a turntable that skipped on track 3 of every record. She never fixed it. "That skip is how I know I'm home," she explained. Thursday dinners became their ritual. She'd cook, simple food, nothing fancy, always enough. He'd bring wine from his collection, then eventually stopped when he noticed she preferred her homemade ginger lemonade. They'd eat on mismatched plates, listen to vinyl crackle, and talk about everything except his money. She asked about his childhood, his dreams before business school, The sketchbook he'd mentioned once and then tried to forget. She asked about the person he'd been before success demanded he become someone else. Nobody had asked him those questions in years. Nobody had cared about the answers. In her cluttered apartment that smelled like art and warmth, Martin began remembering who that person was. The first time he offered to pay for something beyond dinner, she stopped him with a hand on his wrist. They'd been walking past an ice cream shop, one of those artisanal places with flavors like lavender honey and brown butter sage. Martin had suggested they go in, already reaching for his wallet with the automatic. Gesture of someone who always paid, who'd always been expected to pay. "Wait," Arya said. "I want to pay my way. Say yes to the ice cream." The request caught him off guard. Every woman he'd dated before had expectations. Nice restaurants, weekend, trips, gifts that proved his interest through their price tags. His mother had warned him this was simply how the world worked. They want what you can provide, Martin. Accept it or stay alone. But Arya stood there with her second-hand coat and her worn canvas bag, insisting on buying. Her own $3 scoop of honey lavender, and something in Martin's chest cracked open. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to," she interrupted gently. "I want to. There's a difference." So, she bought her ice cream, and he bought his, and they sat on a bench watching the city move around them like they were just two ordinary people on an ordinary date. Not a CEO and an artist, not wealth and struggle, just Martin and Arya, eating ice cream that melted faster than they could finish it. Later, she'd explain it more fully. "I never want you to wonder why I'm here. I never want you to question if I'd stay without the dinners or the gifts or whatever else money can buy. I'm here because of who you are when you forget about all of that." He'd never forgotten about his wealth before. With her, he did. Constantly. Martin had learned early that successful men didn't complain. His father had built an empire through silence, absorbing stress, swallowing doubt, presenting an unshakable facade to the world. "Show weakness, and they'll tear you apart," his father had said. "Business is war. Act accordingly." So Martin had learned to be silent. Bad quarterly reports? Handle it quietly. Exhaustion? Hide it. Doubt about the path his life had taken? Bury it so deep that even he couldn't find it anymore. Then came the night he showed up at Arya's apartment, after the worst board meeting of his career. A deal he'd worked on for 8 months had collapsed. Millions lost. His father would have demanded explanations. His mother would have criticized his strategy. His colleagues would have circled like sharks scenting blood. Arya opened the door, took one look at his face, and simply said, "Come in." She didn't ask what happened. She made tea, that cinnamon blend she loved, and sat beside him on her thrift store couch and waited. Just wait. Not with expectation, but with a patience that felt like permission. "I don't know how to do this," Martin finally said. "I don't know how to just talk about when things go wrong." "Then don't talk about what went wrong," Arya suggested. "Talk about how it feels. How it feels." What a revolutionary concept for a man who'd been taught that feelings were. Obstacles to success, distractions from goals, weaknesses to be eliminated. But in her apartment, with its mismatched plates and skipping vinyl, Martin tried. Haltingly at first, then with increasing honesty, he spoke about pressure and expectation and the exhausting performance of perpetual competence. She listened. She didn't try to fix anything. She didn't offer solutions or strategies. She simply invited him to be human. And slowly, carefully, he accepted that invitation. 6 months passed before Martin said, "I love you." Another 2 before Arya said it back. They didn't fall fast. They fell carefully. Every Thursday dinner was a choice. Every Sunday morning walk through the park was intentional. When Martin traveled for business, he called, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to hear about her day teaching art to elementary school kids, about the mural project she was planning for the community center, about the stray cat that had started appearing on her fire escape. Arya introduced him to her world slowly, testing whether he'd respect it. The community art classes she taught for free on weekends, the scholarship she'd received from some foundation that helped emerging artists, money she'd earned through her portfolio, her vision, her talent. The friends who lived paycheck to paycheck but rich in creativity, who eyed Martin's expensive watch with suspicion until they saw how he listened when Aria spoke, how he'd rolled up his sleeves to help install gallery lighting without being asked. Martin introduced her to his world just as cautiously. Small dinners first, not the galas. His college roommate and wife, not his business partners. He kept her separate from his mother's scrutiny, from his father's judgment, from the parts of his life that demanded performance over authenticity. "Are you hiding me?" Aria asked once, without accusation, just curiosity. "I'm protecting you," Martin answered honestly, "and maybe protect this too. What we have feels fragile sometimes." She understood. In a way, she was doing the same thing, keeping him separate from the parts of her life that his wealth might accidentally overshadow or change. They built their relationship in the spaces between their worlds. Thursday dinners, Sunday walks, phone calls from airport lounges, mismatched plates and vinyl crackle, and the revolutionary act of being completely themselves with another person. It felt safe. It felt real. It felt like forever. Neither of them saw the fracture coming. The PR team arrived at Martin's office on a Tuesday morning, armed with tablets and concern wrapped in corporate professionalism. Victoria Hayes, his company's senior communications director, led the delegation with the kind of smile that preceded bad news. "We need to talk about your relationship," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Martin looked up from his quarterly reports. "My relationship is private." "Nothing about you is private anymore, Martin. You're the face of a multi-billion-dollar corporation." Victoria slid her tablet across the desk. On the screen, a photo of him and Aria from last Sunday, walking through the park, her hand in his, both of them laughing at something ordinary. "The board has questions. Your mother has concerns. We need to get ahead of this." "Get ahead of what?" "I'm dating someone." "You're dating an unknown." Victoria's tone remained pleasant, but her words carried weight. "We don't know her background, her history, her intentions. Before this goes any further, we should arrange a proper introduction, a controlled event. Let us manage the narrative before someone else does." Martin felt his jaw tighten. "She's not a narrative, she's a person. A person who will be scrutinized the moment your relationship becomes public," Victoria countered. "We're trying to protect you both. Let us coordinate a charity gala appearance. We'll prepare her, brief her on expectations, make sure she's comfortable with media attention. Think of it as support." But it didn't sound like support. It sounded like an audition. A test Aria would need to pass before she was deemed acceptable for his world. That evening, Martin mentioned the conversation to Aria over their usual Thursday dinner. He tried to frame it casually, as if it were no big deal, just something his team had suggested. She set down her fork carefully. "They want to prepare me?" "Just media training. How to handle photographers, what to say if reporters ask questions. Standard stuff." "Standard for who?" Aria's voice remained calm, but Martin heard the edge beneath it. "Martin, I teach 8-year-olds how to finger paint. I buy my clothes from consignment stores. I don't need training to be myself." "I know, but I like our ordinary," she interrupted gently. "I like Thursday dinners and Sunday walks, and the life we've built without cameras and scripts. The moment we invite all of that in, we stop being us. We become a performance." She wasn't wrong. But she also didn't understand the pressure already building around them, the questions already being asked, the scrutiny already beginning whether they invited it or not. Martin bought the bracelet on impulse, which wasn't like him at all. He'd been walking past the jewelry store after a meeting, and something in the window caught his eye, a delicate silver piece with small charms representing different art forms. A tiny paintbrush, a miniature easel, a small palette with colored stones representing paint. It was beautiful. It was thoughtful. It was expensive in the way everything he bought was expensive, But he wasn't thinking about the price. He was thinking about how Arya's face would light up when she saw that someone had noticed what mattered to her. He presented it over dinner the following week, a small velvet box placed beside her mismatched plate. Arya opened it slowly. Her expression shifted, surprise, then something more complicated. She touched the tiny paintbrush charm with one finger, studying the craftsmanship, and Martin waited for the joy he'd anticipated. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "But—" Martin heard the hesitation she hadn't spoken. "But it's too much." She closed the box carefully, sliding it back across the table. "Martin, I can't accept this." The rejection stung more than he'd expected. "Why not? I wanted to give you something special, something that shows I pay attention to what you love. I know your intentions are good." Arya's voice carried that gentle patience he usually loved, but right now it felt like distance. "But we talked about this. I need to pay my way. I need to know that what we have isn't about what you can buy me. It's a gift, Arya. People who care about each other give gifts." "Not yet," she said. "Maybe someday, when we're more established, when there's no question about why I'm here. But right now, it feels like too much, too soon." Martin heard "not yet" as not ever. He heard her careful boundaries as rejection of him, of his desire to show affection the only way he'd ever learned how. His family had always equated love with provision, care with expensive gestures. He'd bought his college girlfriend a car. He'd sent his mother jewelry for every occasion. This bracelet wasn't even remotely extravagant by those standards. But Arya lived in a different world with different rules, and Martin was beginning to realize how wide the gap between their worlds actually was. He took the box back, slipped it into his pocket, and they finished dinner with a tension neither of them knew how to name. The article appeared 3 weeks later in a business publication known for celebrity gossip, disguised as financial news. Tech CEO's mystery woman, who is she and what does she want? The photos were grainy. Arya leaving her apartment, Martin picking her up for dinner, the two of them at a coffee shop. Nothing scandalous, but the accompanying text raised questions framed as concern. While Martin Blackwood's professional life remains impeccable. Sources close to the family express worry about his new relationship with an unknown artist. Background checks reveal little about the woman who's captured the billionaire's attention. Martin's assistant brought him the article with his morning coffee. He read it twice, his anger building with each word. They'd made Arya sound like a cipher, a blank space where suspicion could grow. They'd turned her privacy into something sinister, her ordinary life into something worth investigating. The board meeting that afternoon confirmed his fears. Nothing was said directly. Boardroom politics rarely worked that way. Instead, there were murmurs during breaks, meaningful glances exchanged. Over coffee, carefully worded questions about distractions and focus. His CFO, Robert Whitmore, pulled him aside after the meeting concluded. Robert had worked with Martin's father, had known Martin since he was a teenager learning the business. If anyone could be direct, it was Robert. "I'm going to say this as someone who cares about you, not just as your CFO," Robert began. "You're at a fork in the road. One path leads to building the legacy your father started. The other leads to complications that could derail everything you've worked for. You're talking about Arya. I'm talking about perception," Robert corrected. "Fair or not, people are asking questions. Your mother is concerned, the board is watching, and that article is just the beginning. If you continue this relationship, you need to be prepared for intense scrutiny, background investigations, media attention, pressure from every angle. And if I'm not prepared?" Martin asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you need to decide what matters more, this woman you've known for less than a year, or the company you've spent your entire life building." Robert's expression softened slightly. "I'm not telling you what to choose, Martin. I'm telling you that choosing both might not be possible." The warning landed like a weight on Martin's chest, making it hard to breathe. The charity gala was unavoidable. Martin's company was the primary sponsor, and his absence would raise more questions than his presence. He'd asked Arya to join him, their first public appearance together, and she'd agreed despite her reservations, wearing a simple black dress from a vintage shop that somehow made her more beautiful than all the designer gowns in the room. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Arya charmed the mayor's wife with a conversation about public art initiatives. She listened thoughtfully to a tech investor's passionate speech about supporting arts education. She was herself, genuine, warm, unpretentious, and Martin felt his earlier fears beginning to ease. Then came the moment that changed everything. Martin had stepped away briefly to greet a major donor, leaving Arya in conversation with a group of philanthropists. When he returned, he caught the tail end of a whispered exchange between two women he'd known for years. His mother's friends, pillars of society who measured worth in stock portfolios and family names. "She's lovely, of course," one said, her voice carrying just enough to reach Martin's ears. "But we've seen this before, haven't we? A young, beautiful, struggling artist meets a wealthy man. Tale as old as time." "Rebecca's beside herself," the other replied, referencing Martin's mother. She did a background check. "The girl receives monthly deposits from the family foundation, has been for years, and she never mentioned it to Martin." Of course she didn't mention it. Why would she? She's got him completely fooled. The words hit Martin like physical blows. Monthly deposits, background check, got him fooled. He watched Arya across the room, laughing at something the mayor's wife had said, completely unaware of the conversation happening about her. She looked so at ease, so comfortable, and suddenly Martin's mind supplied a different interpretation. Was she comfortable because she was genuine, or because she was skilled at playing a part? His mother had warned him. Robert had warned him. Even the PR team had expressed concerns. And now these women with no reason to lie, women his family had known for decades, were confirming what everyone else seemed to see clearly. Arya was receiving money from his family foundation, regular payments she'd never disclosed. The bracelet she'd refused suddenly took on new meaning. Not principle, but strategy. Keep him believing she didn't want his money while already taking it from another source. Martin's fear, which had been slowly building for weeks, suddenly calcified into something harder. Something like certainty. He waited until they were alone on the balcony, the gala continuing inside without them. The cool night air did nothing to calm the storm building in his chest. "We need to talk," Martin said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Arya turned from the railing, concerned about crossing her face. "What's wrong?" "The foundation deposits." He watched her carefully, looking for guilt, for recognition, for confirmation. "The monthly payments you've been receiving from my family's foundation. When were you planning to mention those?" Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Arya. It's insulting." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, fueled by champagne and fear, and the whispers still echoing in his head. "My mother had you investigated. You've been receiving regular payments from the Blackwood Foundation for years." "Years? And you never thought that was worth mentioning while you were dating me?" "The scholarship?" Understanding dawned on her face. "Martin, I earned that scholarship 2 years before we even met. It's a merit-based grant for emerging artists committed to community education. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. It's my family's money." His voice rose, despite his efforts to control it. "You stood in your apartment and talked about paying your own way. You refused a bracelet because you needed to prove you weren't after my money. But all along, you were already taking it from another source." "I'm not taking anything," Arya said, her own voice shaking now with anger, or hurt, or both. "I applied for that scholarship based on my work, my vision, and my commitment to arts education. A panel of judges selected me. I didn't even know it was your family's foundation until after I'd already received it. And when you found out, when you started dating me and realized the connection," Martin pressed, "you didn't think that was worth disclosing. I didn't think it mattered because it didn't matter." Arya's eyes shone with unshed tears. "That money pays for supplies for the kids I teach. It funds the community center programs. It has nothing to do with us, with our relationship. Everything is about money, Arya. Don't be naive. Martin heard his father's cynicism in his own voice and hated it, but couldn't stop. I'm not an open wallet for you to dip into whenever you need funding for your projects. The words hung between them, cruel and final. Arya flinched as if he'd struck her. I didn't ask for a wallet, she said quietly, tears now streaming down her face. I asked for your time, your trust, your partnership. But apparently, those are things you can't give. She walked past him, back into the gala, and Martin stood alone on the balcony, wondering why winning the argument felt so much like losing everything. 2 weeks after the gala, Arya Warren stared at the positive pregnancy test. In her tiny bathroom, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. The second line had appeared almost immediately, bold and undeniable, transforming her entire world in the space of 3 minutes. She'd suspected for days. The exhaustion that went beyond heartbreak. The nausea that hits every morning. The way her body felt different, changed, occupied by something new and terrifying and miraculous all at once. Her first call was to Farida, her closest friend since art school, the only person who'd seen her cry every night since Martin had walked away. Farida arrived within the hour, carrying her usual remedy for crisis. A thermos of mint tea and brutal honesty wrapped in compassion. What are you going to do? Farida asked, settling onto the thrift store couch that had witnessed so many Thursday dinners with Martin. I'm keeping the baby, Arya said without hesitation. That much she knew with absolute certainty. But I don't know about the rest. Are you going to tell him? The question Arya had been avoiding since she'd seen those 2 lines. She thought about Martin on the balcony, his face twisted with suspicion and hurt, accusing her of using him, of being after his money. She thought about his mother's background check, the whispered conversations at the gala, the way he'd believed strangers over her. If he believed gossip about a scholarship I earned, what would he believe about a baby? Arya's voice cracked. He'd think I got pregnant on purpose. A trap, the ultimate gold-digging move. You don't know that, Farida said gently. Don't I? Arya touched her still flat stomach. He comes from a world where everything has an angle, where love is transactional, where trust doesn't exist without contracts and proof. I can't raise a child in that environment, I won't. Farida poured more tea, letting the silence hold space for the enormity of the decision. I'll love this child, Arya said finally, her voice stronger now, and I'll keep it private. This baby deserves better than being used as evidence in Martin's fear. Better than growing up wondering if their father sees them as a mistake or a manipulation. It was a vow spoken in a cramped apartment over cooling tea, but Arya meant every word. Arya wrote the letter 3 weeks later, at 2 in the morning when pregnancy. Insomnia kept her awake, and her conscience demanded she at least try. Dear Martin, I'm pregnant. The baby is yours. I'm not asking for anything, not money, not involvement, not even acknowledgement. I just thought you had a right to know. I understand why you don't trust me. I understand that your world has taught you to question everyone's motives, to see transactions where other people see relationships. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just sad for what we could have been if fear hadn't gotten in the way. I'm keeping the baby. I'm moving away from the city to start over somewhere quieter, somewhere I can build a life without your family's scrutiny or the media's attention. If you ever want to be part of this child's life, you know how to find me. I loved you. I still do. But I love our baby more, and I won't let them grow up feeling like a burden or a mistake. Arya, she read it 17 times, changed words, rewrote sentences, finally sealed it in an envelope and addressed it to his office. Then she sat with it for 3 days, the envelope propped against, the lamp on her bedside table, waiting for the courage to mail it. On the 3rd night, Farida found her staring at it again. Why haven't you sent it? Because I keep imagining his response, Arya admitted. His lawyers are calling it a shakedown. His mother demanded paternity tests. Him showing up, not because he wants to be a father, but because he's afraid of what I might want from him. She picked up the envelope, felt the weight of words that could change everything or nothing. If he believed strangers about me, what would he believe about a baby? That I planned it? That I'm trying to trap him into marriage or child support or access to his world. Aria's hand moved to her growing stomach. This child deserves a father who wants them, not one who's been legally obligated or guilt-tripped into involvement. She put the letter in her desk drawer, still sealed. Some messages were written to clarify the writer's heart, not to reach their intended recipient. Pregnancy on a teacher's salary in an expensive city required creativity. Aria picked up side gigs wherever she could find them, restoring old paintings for antique dealers, creating custom artwork for local businesses, teaching private lessons to wealthy families whose children needed portfolio pieces for prestigious art schools. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd refused Martin's bracelet on principle, but now she smiled through gritted teeth while rich parents talked about their second homes and vacation properties, paying her barely enough to cover rent. Late nights became her new normal. After teaching all day and working on commissions until her back ached, she'd fall into bed, exhausted, only to be woken by her growing son practicing gymnastics against her ribs. She named him Leo during one of those sleepless nights, watching dawn break over the city she'd soon be leaving. Leo, brave, strong, a lion-hearted boy who'd never known he was named for the courage his mother needed to choose this path. The neighborhood kids started appearing at her door on weekends, asking if Miss Aria would teach them to draw. She couldn't say no. Her apartment became an unofficial art studio. Children sprawled across her floor, with donated crayons and paper, creating masterpieces they'd taped to her walls. She drew chalk hopscotch grids on the sidewalk outside her building, taught color theory using autumn leaves, showed them how thrifted frames from the dollar store could transform their work into gallery pieces worth displaying. Money was always tight. Some weeks, she chose between buying prenatal vitamins and buying paint. She learned to make meals stretch, to shop clearance sales, to accept hand-me-down maternity clothes from Farida without letting pride get in the way of necessity. But she also learned something unexpected, that building a life from scratch, without anyone's financial safety net, carried its own kind of dignity. Every commission she completed, every class she taught, every dollar she earned was hers, not given as charity, not offered with strings attached, not colored by suspicion about her motives. She was building something real, something that belonged entirely to her and the child growing inside her. Something Martin's money could never have bought, and his doubt could never take away. Little Harbour became Aria's refuge during her 8th month of pregnancy. The small coastal town 3 hours north of the city offered cheap rent, ocean air, and blessed anonymity. Nobody knew Martin Blackwood here. Nobody cared about billionaire scandals or society gossip. The idea for Little Harbour Arts started simply. Aria had been setting up her apartment, arranging her few belongings, when neighborhood children gathered on the street below, curious about the new resident. She'd invited them up, spread crayons across her floor, and within an hour had 8 kids creating art with an intensity that reminded her why she'd chosen this path in the first place. Their parents came to collect them and stayed to talk. The town had no after-school programs, no art classes, no creative outlets for kids whose families couldn't afford private lessons. Just empty afternoons and working parents who worried about their children's futures. "You should start something official," suggested Maria Rodriguez, mother of twins who'd painted matching sunsets. "Apply for a community grant. Make this real." So Aria did. 8 months pregnant, exhausted and terrified, she wrote a grant proposal for a community arts education program. She printed flyers at the library and posted them at the grocery store, the laundromat, and the coffee shop. She outlined a mission: accessible art education for all children, regardless of family income. Skills for life, not just for canvas. The grant came through 2 weeks before Leo was born. $15,000 to cover supplies, space rental, and basic operating costs for the first year. Her board of helpers assembled organically. Maria handled scheduling. Farida, who'd followed Aria to Little Harbour, managed social media. Mr. Phillips, the retired teacher next door, volunteered to teach basic woodworking. Mrs. Patterson from the bookstore donated space for monthly student exhibitions. Little Harbour Arts opened its doors when Leo was 3 months old, Aria, teaching classes with her son sleeping in a carrier against her chest. 10 students the first month, 20 the second. By Leo's first birthday, she had a waiting list and enough grants to hire 2 part-time assistant teachers. She'd built something beautiful from crayons and courage, something that fed her soul while feeding her son, something Martin's world would never understand, but couldn't diminish. This was her legacy, hers and Leo's, and it was enough. Martin's grandmother, Miriam Blackwood, died 6 months after his breakup with Aria. She'd been the family's quiet counterweight, his father's ruthless pragmatism softened by her gentle wisdom, his mother's social climbing balanced by her genuine compassion. She'd asked to see Martin alone during her final week, her hospital room filled with flowers from people whose lives she'd touched through decades of quiet generosity. "Tell me about the girl," Miriam said. Her voice weakened by illness, but her gaze still sharp. "There's nothing to tell." Martin couldn't meet her eyes. It didn't work out. Because she took money from the foundation? News traveled fast in his family. "She should have told me." "Why?" Miriam's question caught him off guard. "The scholarship program has helped hundreds of artists. She earned that grant 2 years before you met. Her accepting it had nothing to do with you. But once you started dating, she probably hoped you'd see her for who she was, not what she received." Miriam reached for his hand with fingers that felt too fragile. "Martin, listen carefully, because I won't be here to repeat this. You're treating relationships like your father treats business. Every interaction a transaction, every person a potential threat. This is not a ledger. It's a heart." Martin felt tears burning behind his eyes. "I was protecting myself. From what? From someone who loved you enough to refuse expensive gifts? From someone who wanted to pay her own way?" Miriam squeezed his hand weakly. "Trust will cost you pride. Fear will cost you love. Choose your expense, Martin, because one day you'll wake up in an empire built on suspicion, and you'll realize you're the only one living there." She died 3 days later, her final wisdom echoing in Martin's mind during the funeral, the wake, the empty months that followed. Martin's penthouse condo was spotless, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture arranged by designers who understood aesthetics but not comfort. Everything in its place, nothing out of order, the kind of sterile perfection. That photographed beautifully and felt like living in a showroom. He couldn't sleep there anymore. 3 in the morning found him standing at those windows, watching the city lights blur through exhaustion, remembering Thursday dinners at Aria's cramped apartment with its mismatched plates and vinyl crackle. His condo had a sound system worth more than her entire year's rent, but it had never played music that made him feel anything. His days were filled with speeches about innovation and progress, helicopter views of markets, and trends, strategy sessions, where human beings became demographics and problems became data points. He was good at it. Exceptional, even. The company had grown 30% since his father's retirement. Stock prices were up. The board was pleased. But he couldn't remember the last time he'd had a conversation that mattered. The last time someone had asked about his dreams instead of his projections. The last time he'd felt like Martin instead of Martin Blackwood, CEO. Aria had asked those questions. Every Thursday she'd made him remember who he'd been before success demanded he become someone else. She'd invited him to talk about how things felt, not just how they performed. She'd created space for the person he'd buried under years of corporate armor. Now his Thursdays were boardroom meetings and conference calls. His evenings were networking events where everyone wanted something, a donation, an investment, access to his influence. His mornings were insomnia and regret, standing at windows in a perfect condo that felt nothing like home. Miriam's words haunted him. "You'll wake up in an empire built on suspicion, and you'll realize you're the only one living there." He was already awake, already alone, already understanding what he'd lost. The change started small. Martin began volunteering at a community center in a neighborhood his mother would have, called unsafe and his father would have called a tax write-off opportunity. No press releases, no photographers, no corporate branding or strategic positioning. Just Martin, in jeans and a faded college sweatshirt, showing up on Saturday mornings to move boxes, assemble tables, and listen to people whose lives looked nothing like his. He met Carlos, a single father working 2 jobs to support 3 kids. Teresa, an immigrant running an informal daycare from her apartment because professional childcare cost more than she earned. James, a veteran teaching himself carpentry through YouTube videos because trade school wasn't affordable. They didn't know who Martin was. He'd introduced himself as Martin from the city, and nobody had pushed for details. They cared about whether he could lift heavy things and follow instructions, not about his bank account or business portfolio. For the first time in years, Martin felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with money. Assembling tables for a weekend meal program didn't require strategic thinking or market analysis. It required showing up, working hard, and caring about the outcome because real people would eat at those tables, not because it looked good on a corporate responsibility report. He learned to listen more than he talked, heard stories about struggles he'd never imagined, choosing between medication and groceries, living paycheck to paycheck. Despite working 60-hour weeks, raising children in a system designed to keep people trapped in poverty. These weren't statistics. They were his neighbors, people with dreams and dignity and determination, despite obstacles Martin had never had to face. Slowly, without realizing it, he was learning what Aria had tried to teach him, that value had nothing to do with wealth, and worth couldn't be measured in dollars. The flyer appeared on the community center bulletin board in mid-September, tucked between advertisements for ESL classes and a notice about a neighborhood cleanup day. Little Harbor Arts Open House celebrating 5 years of community art education. Meet our students, see their work, support accessible creativity. Saturday, October 15th, 2:06 p.m., Little Harbor, Maine. Martin almost walked past it. Almost. But something about the mission statement at the bottom stopped him. Every child deserves access to beauty, creativity, and the tools to express their unique vision. Little Harbor Arts provides free and sliding scale art education because talent doesn't depend on income. The words sounded like Aria. That combination of idealism and practicality, beauty and purpose. He pulled out his phone and searched for Little Harbor Arts. Found a simple website with photos of children painting, sculpting, drawing. The About page mentioned the founder, a teacher and artist committed to community education, but no name, no biography, no personal details. Still, Martin's instinct whispered what his rational mind wanted to deny. This felt like something Aria would build, the kind of dream she'd talked about during those Thursday dinners, when she'd described her vision, for making art accessible to everyone, not just families who could afford private lessons. He told himself he wouldn't go. Little Harbor was 3 hours away. The timing conflicted with a board meeting he could easily attend. Going would be stalking, or worse, hoping for something that no longer existed. But October 15th found him in his car, driving north along the coast, telling himself he was just curious about community art programs, just doing research, just supporting a good cause. He didn't examine why he'd worn the faded college sweatshirt Aria had once said made him look like a real person instead of a CEO. Didn't question why his heart was racing as he pulled into Little Harbor's small downtown. Didn't admit he was hoping to find her until he walked through the gallery door and saw his son painting with her eyebrow. Martin stood in the doorway of Little Harbor Arts, paralyzed by the sight of a 4-year-old boy whose left eyebrow arched exactly like his own when he concentrated. The child was creating bold strokes of blue and gold across his canvas, tongue poking out slightly, completely absorbed in his work. The boy looked up suddenly, catching Martin's staring. Instead of shyness, he offered a gap-toothed smile. "Hi," the child said brightly. "I like your crown." Martin touched his head reflexively, confused, before realizing the boy meant his hair, standing up slightly from the drive with the windows down. "Thank you. I like yours too." The boy giggled, paint-stained fingers reaching up to feel his own dark curls. I'm making the ocean. Want to see? Before Martin could answer, he heard her voice. Leo, baby, let's give the guests some space to look around first. Aria, moving through the gallery with that familiar grace, guiding a student's hand, offering encouragement. She hadn't seen him yet, and Martin used those precious seconds to memorize how she'd changed. Hair shorter, face more mature, but still undeniably the woman he'd loved and lost. What's your name? Leo asked, oblivious to the tension building in the room. Martin, he managed, his voice rough. That's a good name, Leo declared with the confidence of someone who'd just turned 4. My name's... Leo. Aria's voice cut through the space, sharp with protective fear. She'd finally seen him, and her face cycled through shock, anger, and something that looked like grief. Leo, sweetheart, why don't you show Mrs. Patterson your painting? She's been waiting to see it. The boy scrambled off his stool, oblivious to the charged atmosphere, and ran toward an older woman across the gallery. Aria walked toward Martin slowly, deliberately, placing herself between him and where Leo had disappeared. Her message was clear. Whatever happened next, her son came first. Hello, Martin, she said quietly. It's been a long time. 5 years. A lifetime. An eternity compressed into the space between them. Aria's office was barely larger than a closet, a repurposed storage room with a desk salvaged. From a yard sale, walls covered in children's artwork, a window overlooking the harbor. Nothing like the corporate spaces Martin inhabited, but it felt more real than any boardroom he'd ever occupied. She closed the door behind them, arms crossed defensively. Why are you here? I found the flyer at a community center. I didn't know it was yours. Martin's prepared speech evaporated under her steady gaze. That's not entirely true. I hoped it might be. I've been looking for you for 2 years. 2 years, Aria repeated, her voice flat. And before that? Before that, I was an idiot. The words came out raw, unpolished. I believed strangers over the woman I knew. I let my mother's paranoia and my own fear convince me that you were using me. I accused you of being a gold digger when all you'd ever done was try to pay your own way and love me despite my family's wealth. Aria's expression didn't soften. And now? Now I understand that wasn't love. It was just power pretending to care. Martin forced himself to hold her gaze. Love trusts. Love listens. Love doesn't demand proof or run background checks or believe gossip over the person standing right in front of you. I didn't love you the way you deserved. I'm sorry. You're 5 years too late for apologies, Martin. I know. He did know. Apologies couldn't undo the damage, couldn't restore what he'd destroyed. But I need you to hear it anyway. You were right about everything. The scholarship was legitimate. I found the records 2 months after you left. You earned it based on merit 2 years before we met. I was wrong, completely, devastatingly wrong. Aria's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Do you have any idea what those accusations did to me? How did it felt to be called a liar and a user by someone I'd planned to build a life with? No, Martin admitted. But I'm learning what my fear cost both of us. Aria turned to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. She slid it across to Martin without a word. He recognized his name in her handwriting, addressed to his office. The seal had never been broken. I wrote that when I found out I was pregnant, Aria said quietly. I sat with it for 3 days, trying to decide if you deserved to know, if telling you would help or hurt our child. Martin's hands shook as he held the letter. Can I read it? If you want. But the short version is, I'm pregnant. It's yours. I'm not asking for anything. I'm moving away. She watched him carefully. I didn't send it because I knew what would happen. Your lawyers would call it a shakedown. Your mother would demand paternity tests. You'd show up out of obligation or fear, not because you actually wanted to be a father. Aria, let me finish. Her voice was steel wrapped in hurt. Leo is 4 years old. He's brilliant and kind and creative, and he doesn't know anything about you. Not your name, not your wealth, Not that he has your eyebrow and your intensity when he's working on something he loves. Martin felt tears on his face for the first time in years. If you want to be part of his life, and that's a big if, there are rules. Aria's protective instinct blazed in her eyes. No press, no publicity, no using him for your image or your family's legacy. No pop-ins whenever convenient. You show up here consistently, on a schedule we agree on. You earn his trust slowly, and if you hurt him the way you hurt me, you're done. No second chances. I understand, Martin said. Do you? Because this isn't about what you want or what you think you deserve. This is about what's best for Leo. I understand, he repeated. Tell me what I need to do. They started with Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 hour each visit, always at the gallery where Aria could supervise. Martin would arrive at 4 o'clock when the children's classes ended, and Leo would show him paintings, sculptures, the elaborate stories he'd created about the characters in his artwork. Martin didn't tell Leo who he was. Not yet. He was just Mr. Martin, a volunteer who helped clean brushes and organize supplies, and occasionally attempted art projects with catastrophic results that made Leo giggle. The first Tuesday, Martin tried to paint alongside the children and created something that looked like a disaster. Leo studied it seriously, then offered gentle feedback. Maybe the trees shouldn't be purple. Unless they're magic trees. Are they magic trees? They are now, Martin decided, and Leo beamed. Thursdays became story time. Martin, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, sat cross-legged on the floor reading picture books to a group of children who interrupted constantly with questions and observations. Leo always sat closest, leaning against Martin's knee, pointing at illustrations, asking why about everything. Alternating Saturdays were reserved for one-on-one time. Martin would take Leo to the park, the aquarium, the library. Simple outings where a billionaire CEO learned to play like a regular. Dad. Paper airplane competitions that always ended with planes. Stuck in trees. Failed attempts at braiding techniques for Leo's art projects. Races to the swings that Martin always let Leo win. He kept his phone in his bag. Didn't check emails. Didn't take calls. For those few hours, he wasn't Martin Blackwood, the CEO. He was just Martin, learning to be the father his son deserved. Aria watched from a careful distance, assessing, protecting, gradually, softening as weeks turned into months, and Martin kept showing up. Keep being consistent. Kept proving through actions that he understood this wasn't about him, it was about the boy, who was slowly, carefully, beginning to trust the stranger with the matching eyebrow. If you were in Aria's shoes, would you have told him years ago? Or protected your peace like she did? Tell me why in the comments, and hit like if you're here for stories where actions matter more than apologies. The photo appeared on a gossip site 3 months into Martin's visits. Someone with a telephoto lens had captured him at the park with Leo, the boy mid-laugh. On Martin's shoulders, both of them grinning at something outside the frame. The headline read, "Billionaire CEO's Secret Son? Martin Blackwood spotted with mystery child." Martin's phone exploded with messages. His PR team, his mother, board members demanding explanations. His assistant forwarded 17 emails in the first hour alone, all with subject lines about crisis management and narrative control. Victoria Hayes called directly. "We need to get ahead of this immediately. I'm drafting a statement denying the relationship until we can position this properly. We'll need DNA tests for legal protection, a timeline of your relationship with the mother, financial arrangements." "Stop," Martin interrupted. "I'm not issuing any statement without talking to Aria first." Silence on the other end. "Martin, this is damage control. Every hour we wait, the story grows. We need to control the narrative." "It's not a narrative, Victoria. It's my son's life." Martin felt surprisingly calm despite the chaos. "I'm not making decisions about him without his mother's input. That's non-negotiable." He drove to Little Harbour that afternoon, arriving unannounced for the first time since they'd established their schedule. Arya met him at the gallery door, her phone clutched in her hand, her face pale with anger and fear. "Have you seen it?" she asked. "I've seen it. I'm sorry. I don't know who took the photo or how they connected it to me." Martin held up his phone showing Victoria's draft statement. "My PR team wants to issue this. I told them no. Nothing goes public without your approval." Arya scanned the corporate language, the careful non-admissions, the phrase, alleged relationship that reduced their son to a rumor needing management. Her hands shook. "What do you want to do?" Martin asked quietly. "This is your call, Arya. Not my team's, not my mother's. Yours." It was the first time he'd given her control over something his world demanded he manage. They wrote the statement together at Arya's kitchen table, Leo sleeping upstairs, both of them exhausted by hours of debate about what truth owed the public versus what privacy protected their son. Martin posted it himself, unedited by his PR team, unpolished by corporate lawyers. 5 years ago, I misjudged someone I loved. I let fear and bad advice convince me to walk away from the best thing in my life. I was wrong, completely devastatingly wrong. There is a child. He is my son. His mother is an extraordinary educator and artist who has built something beautiful in this world despite my absence from it. She is not your story. He is not your entertainment. They deserve privacy, respect, and peace. I am working to earn a place in my son's life. That's between the three of us. I won't be answering questions about paternity, finances, or our personal arrangements. This is the only statement I'll make. To the woman I hurt, I'm sorry will never be enough, but I'm trying to show you through actions what my words destroyed. Thank you for letting me try." The response was immediate and brutal. Comments demanded DNA proof. Reporters called Arya's gallery. His mother left 7 increasingly furious voicemails. A tabloid offered 6 figures for Arya to tell her side of the story, heavily implying she'd been after his money all along. The exact narrative Martin had once believed. Victoria called again. "They're baiting you." One response about the gold digger angle, and we can flip this. Position her as the manipulator. You as the victim finally stepping up for your child. "No." Martin's voice was ice. "Read the statement again, Victoria. Arya is not the story. Anyone who works for me will treat her with respect or find another job. Are we clear?" Another stunned silence. Crystal clear. Martin hung up and blocked 17 numbers that wouldn't stop calling. He'd spent years building an empire on control and image. Walking away from the chance to protect his reputation felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Some things mattered more than public opinion. He was finally learning which things those were. The crisis hit 2 weeks later. Little Harbour Arts landlord, a property management company that had recently changed ownership, sent notice that the rent would triple at the end of the current lease. 4 months to relocate or pay $15,000 monthly instead of 5. Arya called an emergency board meeting in the gallery after hours. Martin sat in the back row, there only because Arya had mentioned it during his Thursday visit with Leo, not because he'd been invited to participate. He watched her lead the meeting with quiet competence. Maria Rodriguez presented their financial reality. Grants covered programming costs, but not rent increases. Mr. Chen suggested fundraising, but even aggressive campaigns wouldn't cover a 200% increase. Mrs. Patterson proposed relocating, but affordable commercial space didn't exist in Little Harbour, and moving would lose the community they'd built. "We could scale back," Arya said, her voice tight with emotion. "Maybe offer fewer classes, reduce staff hours, limit enrollment." "That defeats the entire mission," Farida interrupted. "We started this to make art accessible. Turning kids away because we can't afford space is exactly what we were fighting against." The room fell silent. Martin watched Arya's face cycle through determination, frustration, and grief. She'd built this program from nothing, sustained it through years of struggle. And now financial forces beyond her control threatened to destroy it. Every instinct screamed at him to fix it, write a check, make a call, Solve the problem the way he'd solved hundreds of business problems, with money and influence and swift executive action. But he'd promised no pop-ins, no decisions made around her. He'd promised to earn his place slowly, to prove through actions that he respected her authority over her own life. So he sat in the back and listened, even as solutions burned on his tongue, even as his heart broke, watching her fight to save something beautiful, while pride kept him silent. Martin asked to speak with Arya privately after the meeting ended and the board members had left, their faces heavy with worry. "I have an idea," he said carefully, "but I need you to hear it all the way through before you say no." Arya crossed her arms defensively. "I'm listening. What if the building was purchased and placed into a community trust, not owned by me, owned by a trust controlled by your board? You'd have permanent space at a fixed, affordable rate. The trust would maintain the property, cover major repairs, and ensure Little Harbour Arts has stability." "Martin, I'm not finished." He held up a hand. "I would provide the initial capital to purchase the building, yes, but control goes entirely to a board of local residents, teachers, parents, community, members. Not me, not my family. People who actually live here and use this space. They decide rent rates, building use, everything. I'd have zero authority." Arya stared at him. "Why would you give away that much control?" "Because this isn't about control. It's about making sure Leo grows up in a community that has access to what you've built, making sure other kids have what you're providing." Martin met her eyes steadily. "And because I'm trying to prove I've learned the difference between helping and controlling, between supporting your vision and hijacking it. This is a massive financial commitment. I can afford it, and more importantly, it's the right thing to do." He pulled out a folder with preliminary trust documents his lawyer had drafted. "Everything's here. Board structure, bylaws, my complete removal from decision-making authority. I'm offering to fund it, not run it. I'm here to move chairs while you conduct the music." The metaphor landed. Arya had once told him that about their relationship. She didn't need him to orchestrate her life, just to help carry the heavy things while she led. Arya took the folder with shaking hands, reading through documents that, legally, bound Martin to exactly what he'd promised: financial support with zero control. The trust structure was airtight. His name appeared only as an initial benefactor. Every decision about the building, the programming, and the future of Little Harbour Arts would be made by a board of 7 community members, none of them Martin. "You really mean this?" she whispered. Every word. The tears came suddenly, months of stress and fear and exhaustion finally finding release. Not the bitter tears she'd cried 5 years ago when he'd called her a gold digger. Not the frightened tears when the photo leaked. These were different. Safe tears, grateful tears. The kind that came when someone finally understood what you needed without you having to explain it. Martin stayed perfectly still, not moving to comfort her without permission, just being present while she processed. "I spent 5 years proving I could do this alone," Arya said through tears. "Building something that belonged entirely to me, that nobody could take away or control or claim credit for. And now you're offering help that doesn't take any of that away. Because what you built is remarkable. It should continue. And I finally understand that supporting you doesn't mean directing you." Arya wiped her eyes, looked at the man who'd broken her heart and was slowly, carefully learning to be someone different. Someone better. Someone who could give without demanding. Help without controlling. Love without possessing. "Thank you," she said simply. "Does that mean yes?" "It means I'll bring it to the board. Let them review it. Make sure the community controls what happens here." She managed a small smile. "But yes, Martin, thank you." For the first time since he'd walked into the gallery 3 months ago, Arya looked at him without walls between them. "Would you accept a gift like this? No strings, full control? Or would you worry about the power dynamic? Comment, trust, or boundaries, and tell me why. And if this turning point hit you, drop a below." The rhythm established itself over months. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 o'clock, alternating Saturdays from 9 to noon. Martin guarded those hours with a fierceness that surprised his executive team. "We need you in Chicago for the merger talks," his CFO said during a Wednesday planning session. "Tuesday and Wednesday, non-negotiable." "Thursday then," Martin countered. "Tuesday's blocked." Robert Whitmore frowned at his calendar. "It's a 4 o'clock commitment. We could schedule around it." "No." Martin's tone left no room for argument. "That time is blocked. Find another day or I'll attend remotely." The room fell silent. The old Martin would have rescheduled everything for a merger worth $50 million. This Martin had different priorities. He made the Chicago trip Wednesday morning and returned Thursday at noon, exhausted from overnight negotiations, but present at the gallery by 4 o'clock sharp. Leo ran to greet him with paint-covered hands and a story about the dragon he'd drawn that could breathe rainbow fire. Aria noticed. She noticed when Martin called 30 minutes ahead because traffic was heavy and he'd be 15 minutes late. Noticed when he turned his phone completely off during their time together instead of just silencing it. Noticed when he started keeping spare clothes in his car so he could change from business suits to jeans before arriving, becoming Mr. Martin instead of billionaire CEO Martin Blackwood. "You turned down the Singapore conference," she mentioned one Thursday evening, after Leo had gone to bed and they were cleaning up paint supplies together. Martin looked up, surprised. "How did you know about that?" Mrs. Patterson's daughter works in tech journalism. She mentioned that Martin Blackwood was notably absent from a major industry event. Aria studied him carefully. "It conflicted with your Saturday with Leo." "It did. You could have asked to switch weekends. I would have understood." "I know," Martin said simply, "but I promised consistency. Leo needs to know I'll be here when I say I will. No exceptions for business trips or conferences or anything else that used to take priority." Aria's expression softened. "That matters. More than you probably realize." The almost moment happened 6 months after the trust was established. Martin had stayed late helping prepare for the gallery's annual student exhibition. Aria was in the small kitchen making tea, and Martin reached for cups from the overhead cabinet at the same moment she turned with the kettle. They collided gently, her hand steadying against his chest, his arm, instinctively circling her waist to keep the hot water from spilling. For a breathless second, they stood frozen, close enough that Martin could smell the cinnamon tea and turpentine, scent he'd never forgotten, close enough to see gold flecks in her eyes he used to know by heart. Aria stepped back quickly. "Sorry, I didn't see you." "My fault," Martin said, even though it wasn't anyone's fault even. Though the moment had felt deliberate and accidental all at once. They didn't talk about it, but something had shifted. The actual first kiss came 3 weeks later during a thunderstorm that knocked out power to the gallery. Leo was at a sleepover, his first, which he'd talked about for days with nervous excitement. Aria and Martin had been inventorying supplies by flashlight when the storm hit with surprising violence. "Leo's going to be scared," Aria said, reaching for her phone. Maria already texted. "He's fine. They're building blanket forts and telling stories." Martin showed her the photo Maria had sent. Leo grinning with 2 other kids, completely unbothered by the weather. "He's braver than I am," Aria admitted. "I've always hated storms." They moved to the front window, watching the rain sheet across the harbor. Lightning illuminated the sky, thunder following seconds later. Aria flinched slightly, and Martin's hand found hers without thinking. She didn't pull away. "Do you remember the rain the day we met?" Martin asked quietly. "Rescuing that puppy. Both of us were soaked and ridiculous." Aria smiled at the memory. "You had no idea how to hold him. I thought you were going to drop him. I thought you were the most competent person I'd ever met, running through a storm to save something small and helpless." Aria turned toward him, still holding his hand. "Martin," he kissed her, gently, carefully, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. She leaned in, her free hand finding his face, kissing him back like coming home after weather. They moved slowly, carefully, learning each other again with years of hurt between them and hope pulling them forward. But missteps were inevitable. The first came during a board meeting about expanding Little Harbour Arts programming. Martin, forgetting himself, started offering solutions with the automatic authority of someone used to running things. What you should do is restructure the budget allocation. Arya's hand touched his arm gently but firmly. We should pause. The board looked confused. Martin looked embarrassed. They stepped outside. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I didn't mean to take over. Old habits. I know. But this is my program, my board. You're a community member with valuable input, not the CEO making executive decisions. Arya's voice was patient but clear. If you forget I'm not a headline you can manage, we pause and fix it. That's the rule. Fair rule, Martin agreed. I'll do better. I know you will. That's why we pause instead of me just getting angry and you getting defensive. She squeezed his hand. We're learning. Both of us. They returned to the meeting. Martin raised his hand before speaking, framed his ideas as suggestions instead of directives, and actually listened when the board chose a different approach than what he'd recommended. The second misstep happened when a reporter called Arya, asking for comment on her relationship with billionaire Martin Blackwood. Martin's instinct was to call his PR team, issue a statement, and control the narrative. Instead, he called Arya first. What do you want to do? Nothing, she said. I don't owe strangers explanations about my personal life. Agreed. I'll tell my team to maintain our no-comment policy. That was a test, wasn't it? Martin asked. Maybe a little, Arya admitted. You passed. The rebuilding happened in these small moments, catching himself before reverting to old patterns. Asking, instead of assuming, remembering that love wasn't about control or management. It was about partnership, about choosing someone's peace over your own comfort, about changing because the person mattered more than your pride. The conversation happened on a Sunday morning in late autumn. They'd taken Leo to the park, officially together now, not hiding but not announcing, either just living their lives without worrying about cameras or headlines. Leo played on the swings with friends from the gallery, while Martin and Arya sat on a bench, wrapped in the kind of comfortable silence that only came with time. What are you thinking about? Martin asked, watching her face as she watched their son. How different this is from what I imagined 5 years ago. Arya leaned against his shoulder, a casual intimacy that still felt new and precious. I thought I'd raise him completely alone, teach him to be independent, self-sufficient, not needing anyone because needing people meant risking hurt. And now? Now, I'm teaching him something different. She gestured toward Leo, who was laughing with his friends, sharing the swings, calling for them to watch his tricks. Community, connection. That having people doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Martin thought about his own childhood, the isolation of wealth. The lessons about self-reliance were really lessons about loneliness. What do you want him to know when he grows up? Arya smiled. That keeping your people close isn't clingy, it's wise. That asking for help isn't failure, it's courage. That building something together is better than building something alone. Even if it's messier and slower and requires more compromise. Slower, Martin repeated thoughtfully. He turned to face her fully, taking her hand. Can I ask you something? Always. Would you want to build a life slowly? Not rush into anything, not skip steps or pretend the past didn't happen. Just keep doing what we're doing, but with intention. As partners, Arya's eyes filled with happy tears. Are you asking me to be your girlfriend like we're teenagers? I'm asking if you'd consider building something real with me, at whatever pace feels right. No pressure, no timeline, just us, figuring it out together. Slowly is my favorite speed, Arya said, kissing him softly. Yes, Martin, let's build something slowly. Leo's voice carried across the playground. Mr. Martin, Mom, watch this. They watched together, hands linked, building their slowly constructed life one moment at a time. The 5th annual Little Harbour Arts Open House showcased work from over 60 students, their creativity displayed. on walls that now belonged to a community trust instead of a landlord who could triple their rent. Parents crowded the gallery, proud and emotional, watching their children explain artistic choices with vocabulary they'd learned from patient teachers. But the piece that stopped everyone was Aria's contribution, her first personal work displayed publicly in years. The painting hung in the front window, where afternoon light caught the colors perfectly. A harbor scene, recognizable as their town, with a lighthouse standing watch over calm water. In the foreground, 3 figures held hands, a woman, a man, and a small boy between them. Their faces weren't detailed, making them universal rather than specific, but anyone who knew their story would recognize the gentle intimacy in how they stood together. The caption, written in Aria's careful handwriting on a small placard below, read, "Home is where people choose you on purpose." Leo stood beside Martin, studying his mother's work with the serious concentration he always brought to art. "That's us," he said matter-of-factly. He'd learned the truth about Martin 3 months earlier, processed it with the remarkable adaptability of childhood, and simply started calling him Dad, as if he'd always known. "It is us," Martin agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom painted us like a family. We are a family, buddy." Leo considered this, then nodded with satisfaction. "I know, but it's nice that she painted it so other people know too." Aria joined them, slipping her hand into Martin's, watching visitors, stop to read her caption, and smile at the simple truth it contained. Home wasn't a place or a building or a tax bracket. It was people choosing each other, daily, on purpose. As the open house wound down, and the last visitors trickled out into the autumn evening, Martin and Aria stood together in the gallery doorway, watching Little Harbour settle into its evening rhythm. Leo had gone home with Farida for a sleepover, giving them a rare evening alone. The town moved around them with comfortable familiarity. Mr. Phillips closed his hardware store across the street, waving goodnight. Mrs. Patterson walked her ancient golden retriever past the gallery, stopping to compliment the exhibition through the window. This was nothing like the city Martin had come from. No towering buildings or relentless ambition. No networking events disguised as social gatherings. No performance required just to exist. Little Harbour was small and simple, and real, in ways his old life had never been. "Do you miss it?" Aria asked quietly, reading his thoughts the way she'd learned to do again over months of rebuilding trust. "The city, the company, the life you had before." Martin thought about his spotless penthouse that had never felt like home, the board meetings where everyone wanted something from him, the exhausting performance of being Martin Blackwood, CEO, instead of just Martin, the insomnia and loneliness disguised as success. "I don't miss any of it," he said honestly. He'd stepped back from daily operations 6 months ago, maintaining board membership, but ceding control to executives who'd proven themselves capable. The company was thriving without his constant oversight. Turned out the empire didn't need him as much as his ego had believed. "I miss absolutely nothing about that life," Martin continued, pulling Aria closer, "because everything I actually needed was right here. I was just too scared and stubborn to see it." Their joined hands caught the last of the sunset, holding on to each other, and the life they'd chosen on purpose. Martin had learned lessons that no business school had taught him, truths that only heartbreak and humility could reveal. Don't let fear cost you love. He'd spent years treating relationships like potential threats, seeing angles and agendas instead of genuine affection. His fear of being used had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. He'd pushed away the one person who'd never wanted anything but him. Fear had protected his wallet while bankrupting his heart. The cost was 5 years without his son, 5 years without the woman who, actually seen him, 5 years of an empire that felt increasingly empty. Money is a tool. Dignity is a language. Aria had taught him this through her insistence on paying her own way, her refusal of expensive gifts, her determination to build something that belonged entirely to her. Money could solve problems, fund programs, provide stability, but it couldn't buy respect or manufacture worth. Dignity came from knowing your value wasn't dependent on someone else's generosity. It came from building something with your own hands, supporting yourself, through your own efforts, accepting help without surrendering autonomy. Trust is a muscle, built with hours, not headlines. There was no shortcut to rebuilding what he'd destroyed. No grand gesture that could replace consistent presence. No expensive gift that mattered more than showing up on time, keeping promises. Putting his phone away, choosing his son over conference calls. Trust wasn't won through demonstrations of wealth or power. It was built slowly, through hundreds of small choices that proved his priorities had fundamentally changed. Tuesday afternoons, Thursday story times, Saturday mornings at the park, hours stacked like bricks into a foundation strong enough to hold a family. The richest thing you can offer isn't what you have. It's who you are, over and over when no one's watching. Martin had spent most of his life believing his value came from his bank account, his company's market cap, his ability to close deals and generate profit. He'd measured his worth in quarterly reports and stock prices, in the way people showed his wealth and the opportunities his money created. But Leo didn't care about any of that. He cared that Martin showed up for Saturday park visits even when exhausted from business travel. He cared that Martin sat on the floor during story time, doing silly voices for picture book characters. He cared that Martin tried to paint alongside him despite having zero artistic talent, creating disasters that made them both laugh. Arya didn't care about Martin's portfolio, or his real estate holdings, or his family's legacy. She cared that he'd learned to ask instead of dictate, that he'd ceded control of the building trust to community members, that he'd walked away from media opportunities to protect their privacy, that he kept his phone off during their time together, giving his full attention instead of divided focus. The person he'd become when nobody was watching. Patient, humble, consistently present, mattered infinitely more than the person he'd performed for public consumption. This was the truest measure of wealth, not what you could buy, but who you chose to be. Not what you owned, but what you gave freely. Not the empire you built, but the relationships you nurtured with care and intention. Martin had once had everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. Now he had less wealth and infinitely more richness. The math finally made sense. If this story stirred something in you, tap like, share it with someone who needs a second chance, and subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories for more rich, redemptive romances. Comment, if you believe home is a choice you make daily. Next up, a self-made heiress outsmarts a takeover and falls for her rival's brother. You won't want to miss it.